Once upon a time, there was a very wealthy hat maker who was notorious for being a liar. Although everyone knew he lied, no one cared because of his immense wealth. They just laughed and assumed he was joking. The hat maker loved attending lavish parties with the wealthy elite. At these gatherings, people would boast and exaggerate, often telling tall tales. One lady claimed her husband shot a turkey from 3 miles away. Another man said his son was so clever he could teach the teacher. A third woman proudly bragged that her cat could fetch sticks like a dog. Not wanting to fall behind, the hat maker decided to share the biggest lie of all. "My daughter is so amazing she can turn straw into gold." Everyone around nodded and admired him, even though no one truly believed it. Just then, a commanding voice echoed from the back of the room. "She can turn straw into gold?" Everyone fell silent and bowed their heads. It was the king. He approached the hat maker and asked again, "Did you say your daughter can turn straw into gold?" Terrified, the hat maker stammered and confirmed. The king sternly ordered, "Bring her to me." Then he left the room. The hat maker anxiously muttered, "What am I going to do now?" The next morning, the hat maker brought his daughter Sophie to the palace as instructed by the king. Sophie was confused and terrified, not understanding what was happening. She was taken to a small room where the king awaited. Coldly, he said, "Your father is a liar. Last night he claimed you could turn straw into gold. I despise liars, and I think this is a lie." Then he handed Sophie a bundle of straw and ordered, "Turn this straw into gold before dawn." Sophie panicked. She had no idea how to do such an impossible task. Before leaving, the king warned that if she failed, her father would be fed to the crocodiles. Sophie was left alone, feeling hopeless. As night fell, Sophie grew more frustrated. "This is ridiculous. How can I turn straw into gold?" she muttered. Suddenly, a strange laugh echoed from the corner. A tiny man appeared. He had brown, curly hair, wore a black hat and red-pointed shoes. "Do you need help?" he asked. Sophie quickly explained the situation and begged for assistance. The little man smiled and said, "I can do that." He pulled out 2 knitting needles from his pocket and began weaving the straw. As he worked, the straw transformed into golden thread. Sophie couldn't believe her eyes. A miracle was happening. The little man quickly got to work, weaving the straw into various items: scarves, hats, socks, all made from shimmering golden thread. In no time, the entire bundle of straw was gone, replaced by a pile of golden clothes. The little man turned to Sophie and asked, "Now, what do you have to give me in return?" Sophie hurriedly removed a diamond necklace from her neck and handed it to him. "Perfect," the little man said, laughing softly, and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, the king entered the room and was astonished by what he saw. "What kind of magic is this? How did you do it?" he demanded. The father chimed in, "I told you my daughter is extraordinary, just like her mother." The king, though still skeptical, couldn't hide his greed. He ordered Sophie to be taken to another room, this time with 10 bundles of straw. "If you can do it once, you can do it again," the king said, locking the door behind her. Knowing the little man could help her, Sophie began searching the room. She looked behind the curtains on the shelves, under the table, and then the familiar laugh rang out. "Tee-hee, do you have something for me?" The little man appeared again, took out his knitting needles, and began working. This time, he made golden sweaters, gloves, and even golden underwear. When all the straw had turned into gold, he asked again, "What will you give me in return?" Sophie quickly removed a ruby ring from her finger and handed it to him. The little man smiled, chuckled, and vanished once again. The next morning, the king returned and was once again stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the room filled with golden clothes, stacked from the floor to the ceiling. "How did you do this?" he demanded. Sophie shrugged and simply replied, "I taught myself knitting last winter." The king, still doubtful but consumed by greed, led Sophie to a final room, bigger than any before. The room was filled with straw from floor to ceiling, exactly 100 bundles. "If you truly have this ability, turn all of this straw into gold before morning," the king said. This time he carefully stationed 10 guards outside the door. "No one can help you," the king said coldly. "If you lie, you know what will happen." After the king left, Sophie searched the room for the little man. She turned over every corner, looking under tables, in the cupboard, behind the curtains, but he was nowhere to be found. Desperate, Sophie sat down and began to cry. Exhausted, she eventually fell asleep. When she woke up, Sophie couldn't believe her eyes. The straw was gone, replaced by a mountain of golden clothes. At the top of the pile, the little man was sitting, smiling at her. "Thank you so much," Sophie exclaimed, relieved she had escaped her fate. But then the little man said, "Now, what will you give me for this last job?" Sophie offered a sapphire bracelet and silver earrings, but he refused. Finally, he looked at her and said, "I want your firstborn child." When Sophie heard the little man's demand, she froze. "No, I can't," she cried. But the little man wasn't swayed. He shrugged, smiled, and said, "If you don't agree, I will tell the king you are a liar, and you know what happens to liars." Sophie was completely hopeless. She had nothing else to offer and couldn't let her secret be exposed. Reluctantly, she nodded. "All right, I agree," she whispered. The little man smiled, chuckled, and vanished once more. The next morning, the king entered and was once again amazed. The room was filled with sparkling golden clothes stacked high to the ceiling. He looked at Sophie with admiration. "You are truly extraordinary," he said. "Perhaps one day you can teach me how to knit like this." But Sophie couldn't feel proud or happy. Even though she had escaped danger, the horrific deal she had made still haunted her. Years passed, and Sophie grew into a wise and strong woman. She married a kind man, and they had a beautiful baby boy. Life seemed perfect. One morning, as Sophie played with her child in the garden, the familiar laugh echoed once more. "Tee-hee. Do you remember the deal?" The little man stepped out from behind a bush. Sophie hugged her son tightly, tears in her eyes. "No, you can't take my child." The little man just smiled and gently reminded her, "We have an agreement, but I will give you one last chance. If you can guess my true name in the next 3 days, you can keep your child." Sophie sank to her knees, desperate but still hopeful. "Yes," she whispered. "I agree." The first night the little man returned, Sophie began guessing common names. Tim, Jack, Chris, but he just shook his head, replying, "No, no." On the second night, Sophie tried more unusual names. Balthazar, Ferdinand, Alfonso, but the little man still just giggled and shook his head. "You have one last night," he reminded her. Worried and fearful, Sophie decided to take a walk in the woods to think. She tried to guess his name based on clues. His feet are sharp like a Norwegian's, maybe Bjorn. His hat looks Turkish, maybe Mustafa. His nose is red like an Australian's, maybe Keith. She wandered deeper into the forest, climbing rocks, jumping over logs, until she stumbled upon a small cottage. On the porch, a woman was knitting a baby sweater, singing as she worked. Around her neck was Sophie's old necklace, and on her hand was the ruby ring Sophie had given the little man. The woman called out, "Rumpelstiltskin, Rumpelstiltskin, come here and help me." And from inside the house the little man appeared. Sophie quickly hid behind a bush, her heart pounding. "Rumpelstiltskin," she whispered. "So that's his name." At that moment she knew she had one last chance to save her child. On the final night, the little man returned to collect his prize. He was confident that Sophie would fail. "Well, have you guessed my name?" he asked. Sophie looked up, meeting his eyes, and replied confidently, "It's Rumpelstiltskin." The little man immediately grew furious, his face turning red. "How did you know my name?" he shouted, stomping his feet. "You're supposed to be wrong. You couldn't have known." But Sophie remained calm and unafraid. He stood there seething with rage before suddenly stopping. His body seemed to dissolve in disappointment. Then the little man bowed his head and smiled bitterly. "You will have your child," he whispered, then wiped away a tear with a golden handkerchief. He vanished without a word. From that day on, Sophie and her family lived happily ever after. She no longer had to pay for the horrific deal she had made. Though her life had returned to peace, the story of the little man was always remembered as a lesson about lies and the price they can cost. As for the little man, though he vanished, legend has it that he could still appear whenever someone lied too much, always ready to make another deal.